If you've been listening to our full Manga Alchemists podcast, or my co-host Patrick's occasional Deconstructing Comics appearances, you may have picked up that he's a connoisseur of comic sound effects. This happened because he noticed that Japanese editions of American comics didn't translate the sound effects, and he wanted to provide a guide on how they should be translated to Japanese. He recently released a book for this purpose, and he's here this week to discuss his book, Translating Manga Sound Effects to English, Sound Effects That Didn't Fit the Action, and more. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for helping to keep the show going. You can pitch in by pledging at least $2 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo, and I am talking, as he's an interview subject this time, with Patrick and Kumamoto. How you doing?
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
How's it going?
All right. So Patrick, you put out a lot of publications in various ways and various forms. Now you've put out, and I know you've been working on this for a long time, this book about sound effects in comics. And I've been wanting to have you on for years to talk about this, and this seems like a good opportunity. Although I should add that the book is in Japanese, so our listeners might be kind of out of luck unless you decide to put out an English version.
I am thinking about putting out an English version because I still think it's a good resource.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason that I wanted to do it in the first place, not to jump the gun on your questions, but the reasons that I wanted to do this in the first place is that I was sometimes buying Japanese translations of American comics because I wanted to force them on people. Y'all need to be reading some American comics. And so I still have a good collection of American comics in Japanese that I still force on people. And I was noticing that they never translated the sound effects.
Oh.
And through my research, I found that this seems to have been almost codified from 1978, when the same guy, I think his name is Hirai. It's Ono Kosei. The same guy was working on two different projects to bring American comics to Japanese readers. You had the monthly Superman magazine, which had current Superman stories, just randomly, Superman and other DC character stories in these monthly magazines in Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, the sound effects are not translated. And then, on the other hand, you had this collaboration between Marvel and a Japanese publisher, and he was involved in that too.
Mm-hmm.
And it had Fantastic Four and the Hulk and Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel and Captain America. They put out all these paperbacks. And they're all translated in Japanese except for the sound effects. And so I was kind of that's they've been called the soundtrack of the story, and to not have them, it just kind of made me feel there needs to be something. I think it was 2005 when I noticed, and then I had already kind of put together the very first edition in 2006, which I sold at the comic market. And that might have been the first comic market that you came and visited me at.
Oh, with Mulele and the other Patrick?
Yes.
That was 2000.
Had to be 2006.
Well, see, I didn't meet you till 07. I think 2006 I went by myself.
No, we met in 2006 because you came to my art show, which was in 2006.
Was it? Okay, I was thinking that was 2007. And then we went to a restaurant and recorded a Deconstructing Comics where we talked about Parasite, among other things, which we're now covering in our full Manga Alchemists podcast. Plug, plug.
Plug, plug, plug.
Okay, so this disrespecting of sound effects got you interested in looking into it more. So how is this book organized? Is this like a dictionary, or how is it put together?
So I have a whole like dictionary which has like 2,500 entries into it. And there are, you have your typical onomatopoeia type crash, wham, bang, sound effects, but they're all given their context, like in what situation were they used. And so if there was different situations for the same sound effect, I gave those different situations as a separate entry, etc. But it mostly is made up of the original type of sound effects that the creators just come up with on the spot because they want it to sound as close to the actual thing we are hearing as possible.
Right.
And so that's the main chunk of the book. But I also put in 7 appendices. And then these include things like an article on the very earliest use of sound effects in comic strips, how it kind of made the transition from like lines and stars and exclamation marks to actual words being used for sounds. And it's interesting. In the article, I noticed, because I found a bunch of sounds from like 1902, and I found earlier ones, 1897 in The Yellow Kid. There's an alarm going wang, lang, ting, ling.
Okay.
It's the Katzenjammer Kids was a really popular comic strip back then. It started like right before, like in the 1890 something. And you can see over the years how by 1902 they started using more and more sound effects. In fact, there's an article online that says the very first use of Z's to represent somebody snoring or sleeping was in a 1902 Katzenjammer Kids comic strip. But like I have in the article, I show they get spanked because they're really bad kids. Yeah. Every strip they do something horrible and they try to get away with it, and they always get caught and they get spanked. And it's always these like lines and stars to show the pain. And it started out that the sound effects would be used for things that were off camera or behind a curtain. Like there's this one scene where they're fighting behind a curtain, and so
it was only to let you know there was some action that you couldn't see. Exactly. So if you could see it, then you didn't need sound effect, was, I guess, the way of thinking about it.
That's right. And then there's one innovation which I thought would probably have come much later, which was the adding the cur at the beginning of another sound effect to give it more emphasis, or to give it a 1-2, like a bum bum instead of just a straight bam. Like
cur crash or cur bang.
Yes. So I found in a 1906 comic strip a cur chug. And it was somebody like traipsing through the mud, like some really thick mud, and they're trying to, it's going like blub, blub, kerchug kind of sound. So, yeah, somebody was saying online, like I saw several articles, and it's not, they're published, like publications, not necessarily online things, but they were saying like the first proliferation of sound effects is like 1924, the Wash Tubbs comic strip, and I was like, that is a load of crap, because already you look at different strips from the 1902 to 1910, and they're already using sound effects, and it's just getting more and more popular as it goes on. And so I don't I don't know why that is considered the watershed moment, because that seems much later.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my favorite comic strips, and there's an article about it in here, of all time, is Crazy Cat.
Mm-hmm.
And Crazy Cat there's a love triangle between Crazy Cat, who doesn't have a gender. Sometimes Crazy is referred to as she, sometimes he. Crazy's in love with Ignatz Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
Ignatz hates Crazy and is always throwing bricks at Crazy's head. And then Officer Pup, he would arrest Ignatz when he does that. And Officer Pup loves Crazy. But whenever Ignatz would throw a brick at Crazy's head and it would hit Crazy, because he's crazy, was like, I miss her love. And, and so there was a bunch of variations, because this happened all the time. A bunch of variations on the zip, which would be the brick being thrown, and the pow, which is the brick landing.
Yeah.
And that's from 1916 on. But I have a whole article on that, on all the variations. I have an article where I asked a bunch of popular, or maybe some are less known, comic creators what their favorite sound effects are. I did a top 10 longest sound effects by Don Martin. The longest one being almost 400 letters. Yeah, and then I put my my research paper about how, and this is definitely for the Japanese crowd, like how to translate these darn sound effects. Get to it, people.
You mentioned the zip and pow in Crazy Cat. So that fits with an article I found saying that sound effects are generally either indicating movement or impact. But can you think of examples of something else that a sound effect might represent besides movement or impact?
Well, like, scientifically speaking, it's all friction, right?
Uh-huh.
It's all some kind of friction, some kind of thing hitting or rubbing up against another thing. But there's vocalizations. That would be the other big category. Would be vocalizations, and then you could split all those up into all kinds of categories, like water impact, or flesh or bone or metal, and then vocalizations can be human or animal. And that would be another category that I would split those up into. But
and then in a lot of manga, we have like sound effects for things that don't make sounds. Right?
This
happens a lot.
But as you know, for Anglophone comics, then we don't have such useful words, so we write things like shudder.
Yeah.
and shock. And
or
trip.
Glasses breaking, shatter. There must be a better way to handle that than just writing the word for what's happening.
Well, I think you could reverse engineer the way that I'm asking people to translate original sound effects, which I call echomimetica, as opposed to onomatopoeia.
Okay, so what's the difference there?
So, echomimetica is... Well, okay, so onomatopoeia, we all recognize, is words that are trying to kind of represent a sound somewhere in the word. Words like whack and spang and whatever. But they're found... I think they're easily found in the dictionary, the onomatopoeia. And they're not always trying that hard to sound exactly like the original sound. Like machine gun, what's the old-fashioned sound effect for machine guns?
Rat-a-tat-a.
But they don't really sound like that, do they? They're more like like this. And so an echomimetica would try harder to represent that actual sound, but you won't find one in a regular dictionary.
No.
You won't find
Right.
So that's how I differentiate those. And it's not always a useful differentiation. I think in general you could refer to all these things as onomatopoeia, but I am kind of a stickler about, because I'm mostly pushing these original ones that aren't found in the dictionary, that trying to establish echomimetica as a distinct category.
A while back, I fed you some that were from Jack Kirby stuff from the 70s. Did any of those get in there?
Yes, I'm sure they did.
Okay.
I have a list of the comics that I used, and there is. I didn't use everything. Some comics just didn't have interesting or unique sound effects, and so they didn't get used. But I used so many. I was trying to think. I think at least 500 comics were actually used, but I know I went through a lot more than that.
Coming up, can Patrick guess the action taking place just by being quoted a sound effect from an actual Marvel comic? After this. This podcast is part of the Deconstructing Comics Network, where we're grateful to our supporters on Patreon. Patrons get exclusive extra content. Pledge $2 a month or more and get Batman 66 podcast Bat Bits, where we've recently gone over an early draft of Rick Vollert's script for As the Bookworm Turns, and we'll be digging into a variety of documents from the files of William Dozier, producer of Batman and the Green Hornet, including his correspondence with Bruce Lee and more Season 1 Batman scripts. At $4 a month, you also get our monthly show Silver Age Batman, where I'm moving through the book Batman in the 50s issue by issue with a rotating second chair of Paul, Emmett, Patrick, or Kumar. Follow our Patreon for free and you can hear the first 2 episodes of both Bat Bits and Silver Age Batman. Check it out at patreon.com/deconcomics, and thanks for your support.
Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe.
Spanning from the first issue of Who's Who in 1985 all the way through the loose leaf edition.
Including all the updates, the spin-offs, custom Who's Who pages for forgotten characters, and tons of in-depth character spotlights.
Entries span from the golden age of DC
and into the extreme 1990s.
Covering characters such as Superman by Kurt Swan and John Byrne.
The Justice League by Kevin Maguire.
Batman by Dick Giordano.
The New Titans by Tom Grummett.
Wonder Woman by George Perez.
The Legion of Superheroes by Keith Giffen.
The Flash by Carmine Infantino.
Lobo by Simon Bisley.
The All-Star Squadron by Jerry Ordway.
Firestorm by Al Milgrom.
Aquaman by Chuck Patton.
So many entries talking about Ian Karkull.
The Forever People again, and again, and again.
And hundreds of other characters found in Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe.
Available wherever you find podcasts and at fireandwaterpodcast.com.
Nuclear Man, Batman, Hawkman, 2D Man, and Hour Man.
Who are all these people, man?
They're all part of the DC Who's Who.
I mentioned to you ahead of time, so there are some comics that hardly have any sound effects. And what's an interesting one to me is that, Batman comics before the Batman TV show had no punching sounds. You just see them punching, but there'd be no pow or biff or anything. It was just showing some lines showing the impact, maybe.
Well, I know for sure that DC definitely used, bams and pows for punches in the past, before the TV show. Mm-hmm. But I think... I don't know what era, we're looking at the 50s, right? 50s and 60s.
Early 60s, yeah.
Yeah, so depending, I think, on the creative team and depending on the editors, that there might have been a period where they said, no, we don't do that. But the people who created the TV show, they had it definitely in their minds that was a thing that was done.
Yeah.
And so there was probably a time where it was more common in the Batman comics.
Yeah. Or at least it was those words were getting used in some comics somewhere because they were, Pow and Biff and whatever were right there to use, even if they hadn't been in recent Batman comics.
Yeah, and they've been used a long time. I was really surprised about how early some of the, like, wow, Biff has quite a history. It's kind of like,
So, what are some factors that affect whether to use sound effects and what kind of situations they're used?
Well, to be snarky, snobbery. Some people think they're truly. Some comics creators think they are too good for sound effects because. And it's part of it. The Batman TV show did not do us any favors. Like comic fans, it did not do us any favors in regards to, like, let's take comics seriously.
No, I mean, decades later, I was hearing a podcast host introducing a segment on comics with Biff, Pow.
That, I swear, that every darn time. It's like, hey, kids comics, or Biff Bam Pow. Comics aren't for kids anymore.
Yeah,
They've been saying that for 50 years, I swear. Comics aren't for kids anymore. And,
Biff Pow, comics aren't for kids anymore. Yeah,
which is, they're contradicting themselves right there. So there is that kind of stigma that some creators are trying to get away from, so they don't use as many sound effects. I think because superhero comics dominate the American comics landscape, that having a cool sound or having a sound that specifically references, like, you're able to build a better picture in your head. Is this a long sound, or is it just a quick? If you want to make it sound faster, if you want to add to the art, there's all kinds of good ways to use sound effects. A sound effect itself can tell, like, a story. It's like, depending on how long it is, how many syllables it has, it can tell a whole story. Like, this is the door creaking, like just getting moving and then sliding across the ground and then slamming into the door frame. You can do that in one whole sound. But I think, quote unquote, more serious comics tend to avoid sound effects or use them very sparingly. Sometimes the sound can tell the story, so I don't think they can be completely avoided.
I feel like a lot of more kind of arty comics or underground comics have often not used many sound effects. Like, if I think of a Charles Burns book or something, I don't think there's much there indicating sound.
But I think, like, in some horror comics and in some, like, in comedy, like in gag comics, it's like, it's so easy to lean on the goofy sounds, but when in horror comics, it's really good for depicting things that are off stage, like the footsteps that are coming closer, that are, the zombie that has risen from the muddy grave. It's there's different ways to depict that, but it's like, when like, what is that sound coming closer? It's a great way to build suspense. So
can you think of a sound effect that you saw in a comic where you thought it didn't fit the situation?
It doesn't jump out at me, but, like, there were 2 or 3 sound effects in the same comic, and it was like one of the earliest comics that featured Deadpool. And I felt, I cannot understand at all how this sound is supposed to represent anything happening on this page. It doesn't seem to represent any recognizable sound of what could possibly be happening. And I was like, some people are bad at it. That's good to know. Generally, that it's the writer that writes the sound effects. But sometimes the editor will, like, add something in there. But I think we can put the blame on whoever was writing those issues. So.
So I thought I'd try this out here. So I found some, I think these you'd call these echomimetica in some actual comics, and I want to see see what you think the sound is indicating.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so I think it might make the most sense if I spell them. CRRTGTG.
Let's see. To me, it sounds like some kind of mechanical thing that isn't working, like something like that. It's like a literal sabotage, like a wrench thrown in the works, kind of.
Okay.
Of sound.
I forgot to mention this is from the first issue of the current Ryan North Fantastic Four run. The first issue of that, and
maybe it's metal bending. I don't know.
Yeah. So what was happening was that the Thing was crushing a gun in his hand.
Aha.
Yeah. So metal bending is about right. Okay, this is still from FF number 1 of the recent vintage, not Lee Kirby. KRRRAKKOW.
Krakow.
It's not in Poland.
So this is either like it's a sharp sound, right? But it's a big sound, so it's like usually like a weapon being fired is usually how I picture like Krakow.
Okay. Actually, what was happening was that a vehicle collided with the Thing. So it's a crashing type of sound.
It's a crash and a crack and a pow.
So in this story, Thing and Alicia were in this town where time had kind of gotten looped, and it was like stuck in the 50s or 40s or something, and like every night it would reset and repeat the same day again. And so the sound is HVV, VVVVVVRM. HVVVVVVRM.
Okay, so this sounds like a humming motor kind of sound.
Yeah.
So, and set in the 50s, so I'm going to guess it's a hoverboard from Back to the Future. No.
No.
But it sounds to me like a buggy, you know, or a car vrooming along.
So actually, every time that time reset, the things that were happening would kind of fade out, and that was the sound of everything fading out. Okay, this is from Jack Kirby's Eternals issue 2. WAAZZMMM.
Wasm. Huh. That's interesting. Let me think. This is the sound of a man checking out an overdue library book. No, I really don't have any. Wasm. I don't. It's a quick sound. But there's some like friction happening. You know, with the Z's. But there's an end point, right, with the wasm. So something being swung. In an arc, and I'm not sure.
Okay, so what was happening in the panel was that some kind of beam was blasting a ship that was flying over.
I see. That's the zzz. I
so
see. Good.
Kind of a
that's
laser
good.
cannon or something, and zapping it. And then in Eternals number 4, there are two sounds together that like part of the same action. It's two consecutive panels. The first one is WUMM. The second one is ROOMMP.
Roomp.
Yeah. Wum,
So,
roomph.
two sounds together. Well, wum, I'm guessing, is a very loud, dull impact.
Mm-hmm.
And then roomph. Roomph is more like it is a dull, but it's more like a softer thing hitting a hard thing, maybe.
Yeah, you're on track here. So I'll read the narration from this section. A small missile streaks from the strange pistol and finds its target, which was Icarus's forehead. So that was the wum. And then next panel, something fixes itself to the forehead of Icarus and flares up with explosive energy. Roomph.
Yeah.
Kind of unusual situation. Would be hard.
Yeah, very
hard
unusual.
To guess.
Hard
Yeah.
to. I wasn't reading forehead in any of.
No,
any of
but you said a hard thing and a soft thing, so
Yes.
I think you were right there.
Yeah. Like a flesh and a bone kind of a deal. Often has like a kind of a mix of a hard, like a dull, and then like a softer sound. So like after looking at all these sound effects, it kind of teaches you something about how somebody who is a native English speaker kind of connects sounds to meanings. It's there's a famous quote by Saussure, who wrote very important treatise on language and such, and he was saying like there's no connection between what words, the sounds of words and the meanings. He was saying there's no connection whatsoever. That it's all random and arbitrary, and I find that very hard to believe when you have so many words like related to water that have the like a SP sound or a SH sound or a SPL, like splash and, splatter. And, there's all, I think you can't completely divorce sounds. And there's research that I used for my research paper that called sound symbolism. And then if you look into that, there's a little bit more support for that idea that some sounds do have almost universal meanings. There's, like some of those water sounds you can find in other languages, not just English. Like basha basha in Japanese, and it also has the SH.
So, anything else? What have I missed here? What else did you want to say about sound effects?
Well, just to give a little history about I first came out with the first edition as a 44-page zine that I sold at the comic market in Tokyo, and then about every time I would put it out, it would sell out, and then about 10 years later, I put out another, like an updated edition, and I made about 60 copies, I think, and I brought them to the Kaigai Manga Festival.
Right, yeah, that we used to cover on Deconstructing Comics.
Yes, and I brought them there, and at the time I did not know the power of Twitter. Somebody tweeted about it, and all of a sudden I had a line of both, and sold out so quickly.
Wow.
And I was like, wow.
Should have printed 200.
I know. But yeah, some people wrote articles about it. I got an article in the Mainichi Shimbun business insert or something, like a picture of me holding it. And in fact, I got this one guy contacted me and said, we're going to do a commercial with some of the Johnny's crowd for the Y Mobile. We're going to do a commercial, and we want to use sound effects as visuals in this commercial. Would you be a consultant? And so I came up with the sound effects. Now, I don't think that they ever ended up making the commercial, but I got paid for being a sound effect consultant, and that's pretty cool. So, but like after, in 2016, there was a huge earthquake here in Kumamoto. And after that earthquake, I felt the need to do something, to create, I was just feeling very mortal and finite, and that I needed to kind of output stuff. And I took an online course with Jessica Abel. She's a comics creator, called the Creative Focus Workshop, and it kind of got me to hone down, like kind of focus on making one thing, because I always had like 50 million things I wanted to make. And this was one of the things in the running, my dictionary was in the running, because I always wanted to update it. I wanted to add more articles, and I wanted to add a lot more entries. And so I was thinking about this, but I ended up doing a picture book about the earthquake. And so this kind of got put on the back burner for another almost 10 years. And then this year, when I started getting more involved in doing these zine-focused, artsy zine-focused shows, I started putting out more personal zines and other stuff. And I realized I wanted to finish this and get this off my bucket list. And so I went to town on it, and it went from like about under 1,000 entries to like 2,500 entries, and I added all the articles and things, and I actually took it to a printer instead of just making copies and stapling it myself, which you can do with a 44-page book. You can't do with like 192, 194 page
big
book.
staples.
Yes. And really strong Popeye forearms.
Yeah.
But you can find me and the zine stuff I make at my Patokon Art, PATOKONART, Instagram. And when I do make an English version of this, I will definitely put an announcement up there on that Instagram.
I was surprised you didn't seem to have done anything about sound effects on your YouTube channel on Gaijin Guy, or is that kind of off topic for Gaijin Guy? You do a lot about comics there.
Mostly I'm focused on rare and vintage Japanese comics. So I don't really do a lot about like
the mechanics of comics.
Well, I don't do a lot about like U.S. comics or overseas comics, and that's mostly what I've been focused on. But it has been suggested to me that I should definitely make a dictionary for Japanese sound effects, but not because there's a million Japanese sound effect dictionaries, because they have so many codified sound effects that they use in daily language. But there's still comics only original sound effects. And so I think kind of focusing on that and picking up a bunch of those might be a good project to do. And then in that case, I think when I do introduce Japanese comics on that channel, I do sometimes talk about the sound effects that show up.
Okay.
But it's true, I haven't done a whole episode just on sound effects.
Okay. All right. But now you've done a whole Deconstructing Comics episode on sound effects.
Yes. Yes. I think the only thing is lacking is just for me to do some research and, start writing things down, recording.
Have you seen, I guess Don Martin would be a good example, sound effects done for humorous effect?
I mean, you almost can't have gag comics without sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I mean, yeah, there's verbal gags, which don't need sound effects. But I mean, Don Martin's stuff was, the sound effects were half the humor. I have an article in here about the 10 longest Don Martin sound effects in Mad Magazine. And the longest one is a typewriter. It's tick a tick tick a tick tack tick a tick a tick a tick tick tack tick a tick tick tick, and so on. And it's 395 letters.
When I was doing my comics, I had a running gag of sound effects that didn't have any vowels in them. Just, you know.
Don Martin tended to use a lot of like letters that we don't use a lot, like Q's and Z's and F's. You know, he liked to throw those together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and yeah, there's a lot of schlep and schlup, and you know, just on their own, you don't even know what they're referring to, and they're already funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, should we mention about how our running gag on our other podcast is Boing?
Right. Well, I've been covering 2 different translations of Parasite, and one is from Mix, later known as Tokyo Pop, who were putting out this translation of Parasite in the late 90s, early 2000s, and when the Parasite moved in a few cases, the sound effect was boing, which just sounds all wrong because he's not
so
springy.
So wrong. Boing should not be used in a horror comic ever.
Yeah, works for Don Martin, certainly. But, yeah, even though Parasite is occasionally funny, yeah, it just, no.
Well, I appreciate you having me on here to talk about this project that I finally got into shape after 20 years.
Yeah, it gives us all hope that our back burner projects can happen someday.
That's right. See, I put the Kanzenban, the perfect edition, or the complete edition on there.
On the cover. Okay. Check the show notes for a link to Patrick's bookstore, where you can order the ebook of the English version of his sound effect dictionary. Follow us on Blue Sky at Decon Comics. On Facebook, we have both a page and a group. Those are linked from deconstructingcomics.com, as is our YouTube channel, where our episodes are posted every week as videos of a single image. You can comment on our episodes on YouTube or on our site, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, or talk to us. Click the Leave a Voicemail link on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. The music backing the promotion of our Patreon is Change by Jazar. Recently on our Patreon-only Silver Age Batman podcast, Kumar and I touched on Julius Schwartz's idea that putting a gorilla on the cover will always sell more magazines, and how that idea likely birthed the 1960s DC series Angel and the Ape, about a beautiful young woman and a comics artist gorilla who run a detective agency. Although the series was not super successful and not well remembered, it turns out that it saw 2 revivals, in 1991, written and penciled by Phil Folio, and 2001, with script by Howard Chaykin and David Tishman, art by Philip Bond, and beautiful Art Adams covers. Each one has its good and bad points. It's hard to say that any version is really good, but comparing them tells us a lot about how U.S. comics changed over the course of 35 years. Next week, Kumar and I go ape, talking about all 3 versions of Angel and the Ape. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.